I am Maria Fruth, President and CEO of the Healthcare Foundation, and we, the Healthcare Foundation Board of Directors, has the pleasure to welcome Notre Dame, School of Architecture, and an incredible team. But I'm gonna let Mary Ann be the one introducing you to who is who and talk about what they worked so hard this entire week. But before we start, please share with me our sincere appreciation on behalf of the city. Where's the mayor? There he is, right, Mayor? On behalf of the city and on behalf of HFL, for all of you that participated on listening sessions, giving feedback, and most of all, to you, Mary Ann, and your team. Thank you. Yeah. Who needs next?
Jen.
Okay.
Jen. Well, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Mary Ann Casado, and I am on the faculty at the School of Architecture at the University of Notre Dame, and I'm the director of our emerging Center for Housing and Community Regeneration. We are within the school working with communities just like yours and nonprofits throughout the Midwest to tackle really critical issues that you guys are facing here. Every city is local and every city is global. We find there are patterns everywhere that are challenging to our economic development, to our daily lives, that relate back fundamentally to the built environment, specifically the patterns of development that we have built with over the course of several decades, especially since the 60s, that we feel today, that impact our lives. It impacts our economic development. It impacts whether somebody is going to move to take a job in your city and decide to live here. It's whether somebody can afford to live in the home that they own. It's whether your children will choose to live in your community. We have met with so many amazing people in your community and heard voices that are so critical about daily issues that relate to the built environment. So our new Center for Housing and Community Regeneration is working to help communities just like yours to address these issues, come up with design solutions, policy solutions, and strategies and implementations that allow us to address these critical issues. So we're really fortunate to be here. We love coming in. We've been on an event called a Charrette, which has been the last week, very intense. Some of us were here till after 4 a.m, ready to go. And so this is a really exciting time for us. We come, we parachute in. We have been learning about your community over the course of the last several months. The Healthcare Foundation and the mayor reached out last December and said, we've done this survey. We have identified that we have a housing issue in our community, and we don't know what to do next. What next? Can you help us? This was music to our ears. We loved this because, first of all, whenever I tell anyone, this is so unique, by the way. You have to understand how absolutely unique and special this is. The fact that a healthcare foundation has determined that housing is a medical issue. It is so fundamental. I mean, there's nothing more fundamental than food and shelter. And how can someone be healthy if you don't have a safe and secure place to live? This is a nationwide issue, but the lens with which you are coming at it and the support of the city, from the mayor at the top to the city staff who have been with us all throughout this process, means that what we are about to see, I love this process because I learned so much throughout the process. I'm always blown away by the colleagues that I'm able to be here with. These are ideas that really could happen because of the vision keepers that are in this room. The vision keepers from the top that will be working, the vision keepers that are on the day-to-day working on it, and the people that will be here to all of you. You are the vision keepers of your community. In the world that we live in, it feels like there are so many things that we see that we don't like, if it's maybe trucks going down your main street, or housing that feels like it's out of control, or any other number of issues that feel like they are out of our control. This is a process that puts it back in your hands. You guys get to determine what your community is. You get to choose what La Porte is today and in the future. You get to define whether your daughter will move back after she grows up. what's extraordinary, I find amazing, and especially special about La Porte, is that I'm from Alaska. I live in Indiana. When I ask here, I'll ask this question: how many people grew up in La Porte? That is incredible. You do not get that in most places. The number of arms that were just raised says there's something really special about this place. One of the other exceptionally special things is the fact that you didn't tear your city down. So within our center, within the work that we are doing, we're working in Kalamazoo, we're working in South Bend, we're working in Elkhart. They bombed out their cities. So we're used to going in places that are just flattened. And we come to La Porte and we all look at each other. The first time Stefanos Palazotis, our dean, came with me, I'd come once, he came the second time, he's like, Marianne, why are we here? They still have a city. Like, what are we doing here? And yes, there are issues in your city, and we're gonna talk about them tonight. And there's a lot of opportunities within those issues. But what you have to work with is absolutely unique. And the fact that there are generational families here is absolutely unique. And to return to the point previous, you can control your future. You get to choose the La Porte of the present and the future. You were handed a La Porte of the past with policy decisions that have been nationwide. We disinvested downtowns. We disinvested urban neighborhoods. We put traffic through as if the only purpose for a street was to move a vehicle, forgetting that people also need to be on that street, that businesses are on streets. We completely ignore the fact that humans are driving the vehicles and humans are living in our cities. You get to choose. It's up to you. We are loving this process being with you. It feels like the choice is made from all of the support that you're getting, but everyone in this room is a stakeholder. Everyone in this room gets to participate. And so it's really exciting. I fully believe that what you're about to see on these walls that we're proposing, you will actually execute because you have the opportunity to do so. You have the vision and you have such a foundation. So I'm going to present to you a little bit of an overview of what you're going to see this evening. This has been, we did our listening sessions. First we met in December. We had our listening sessions along the way. We've had several meetings this week. This is a 4-day process. So everything that you see here pinned up, we've done in 4 days. We are coming out of the university, and there are students with us, but the students that are with us are acting here as professionals. So this is a professional project. We're coming in, we actually have an incredible international team of expertise. Whenever we come into these projects, we assess it ahead of time to determine what is the team that needs to be there with us. And so we've drawn people. We have an international team that is absolutely incredible, that specializes in all of the issues that we needed to address here. And they're going to come up one at a time and present. We'll co-present as we go through each of the categories. We came the first day, we toured. We prepped the team as to what they were going to be doing, but we toured. We walked around, we drove around, we saw your city, we met with folks, and really got a chance to absorb it. The first day was about assessing. What is it that we've seen? What is the diagnosis? And where do we want to go with that? The second day, on Tuesday, we got that up on the pages. We drew it out, we tested it. We said, okay, these are the things we saw, and this is the proposed set of tools and solutions for these issues. This is how we would address it. We got feedback for both of those nights. We had public presentations. We got the feedback late Tuesday as we were going. We walked through and made a plan of attack for how to get to this point. Yesterday was production. Today has been production, designing and refining. One of the reasons we like this process is that typically in a design process, an engineer goes off in their room. The architect and planners go here. A preservationist might be here. Everybody is split. In this process, we were all in the same room. That allowed us, we brought stakeholders in, we brought local developers in, we brought the Department of Transportation in, we brought people in, everybody in to sit around the table and give immediate feedback. All of us have to make decisions. If I'm going to draw a building, I make, a bunch of lines go down on the page. Some of them I care about and some of them I don't, just I have to connect the dots. And when we're solving problems, when we some of the decisions matter, some of them don't. And if I can sit at the table with the other person in the other discipline and discuss it and have immediate feedback, we can quickly get to a point that would otherwise take months. So what's happened here, because it's been so intense, has been this immediate feedback. We draw, we talk to the other disciplines, we work together, and we create solutions that are actually viable and already vetted. This will take months now to put into a final report. We'll continue to vet it. We'll work with the Healthcare Foundation. We'll work with the city, and we'll make sure that the presentation that we give you is refined even further. But the big ideas came out of this week, and now it's a process of going through and getting it to an implementation point. So one of the big things, and then I'm going to talk about what you're about to see, is that each of the lenses that you see, as you'll see the different disciplines, come from a vision plus implementation point of view. If we were here only to talk about vision, we would be dreamers and artists. But if we only talked about implementation, we would be doing we would be spending a lot of money on a lot of things that may or may not work. So everything you're going to see tonight is presented with both of those in mind. What is the big idea? What holds this together? Why are we doing it? And how will it help this community? Not just vision, though. How will we implement it? How do we pay for it? What is the toolkit? What is the policy? There are a lot of things that you're going to see tonight that are about policy. Because a lot of the issues that you have are because decisions were made previously without thinking about the knock-on effect over time. So there are actually some really easy solutions that are just about changing a policy, and then other pieces will fall into place. It's also something our Dean, Stefanos Palazoides, commonly says is, your city didn't turn into this overnight. This was a series of many decisions over many years and many policies. It will not turn around overnight. So those are the things that we have to look at. So all of these decisions, they're small policies that will allow you, small and big, small investments, small and big, that will allow a vision to work together with implementation to create the place you want to be. So without further ado, we are going to start. We have a series of presentations starting with housing. We're going to talk about housing. We're going to move on to preservation. We're going to talk about parking and transportation. And then we're going to zoom in and look at some of the ideas that are more specific to downtown and then the hospital site. So I'm going to bring up the first speaker, Jen Griffin. We're really fortunate to have Jen with us. Jen is a housing expert she's coming to us from Oklahoma, but she has actually some deep ties here. Also went to Notre Dame, which of course is near and dear to our heart. You'll see, that will be a theme in our team. We love our team. But Jen came to us. Jen actually was instrumental in working on the South Bend zoning code and the South Bend pre-approved plans. So is very familiar with the housing issues of our region. And we were very fortunate to have Jen join us on this team. And it's Jen.
Thank you, Marianne. And it's great to see so many people come out this evening, and great to see a lot of familiar faces of folks that I had a chance to meet throughout the week. So really excited to kind of share with you where this where our week of work has led to us. Before we kind of talk about the master plan, I think this is kind of the culmination of all these pieces that we're going to talk about over the next hour or so. So we might I think that we'll come back to this as you kind of see all the pieces as they fold back together. But obviously, wanted to start with basically the main reason that we came here. It had to do with the housing study and the challenges you guys are all experiencing currently based on housing. Got here on Monday and started walking around, and it just was blown away by just the opportunities that exist. So a lot of our work is just helping to articulate and vocalize those opportunities. I think talking to some of you folks, you've already identified for us some of the opportunities by speaking with you, and then obviously just identifying some of the challenges, and that really is where our work starts, is identifying the challenges and the opportunities and how can we build from that. Before I jump into to talking about that, I do want to mention, I like to say this when I talk about housing, that housing is like in a complex ecosystem. There are so many components that go into it that could cause it to be just off balance and make it challenging for a community to provide the housing type and variety and quantity that they need. Everything from construction to financing to building codes to infrastructure to codes. And so it's one of those things that, and actually one of my clients, Tim Corcoran, who's the planner in City of South Bend, is here, and he often says it's one of those things that it's a long time effort to kind of fix housing. You know, it's like you can't lose heart because there's always going to be something that keeps come up, and that you're going to have to continue to work towards and fix and overcome those challenges. But locally here, what we identified to jump in is that, and obviously this came from the housing study, is that there is a potential demand for housing, and the quantity of that demand depends on what you do in the next couple of years. Based on historic growth, there hasn't been much population increase, but there is a current demand in terms of just right-sizing the types of housing that you do have. So you do have some current challenges with the housing variety that are here. You know, nationally we see trends where household composition is changing drastically than what it was like, 50 years ago. Households of families with 3.25 people is not necessarily the norm anymore on all age spectrums, and so providing those different sized units and those different units and different price points depending on income level, it has become more complex today, and that's something that you all are dealing with as well. Something kind of unique here is that you have a lot of really old housing stock, a lot of great character, but it just hasn't been able to be maintained. And so that's also putting some of your historic structures and buildings at risk. And then also, in terms of dealing with some of your housing units, and our focus area was this area in yellow, primarily the downtown and the adjacent in-town neighborhoods here. But we did start to identify some of the areas north of the train tracks, but we focused most of our work here south of the train tracks. But we saw some, what was identified as some poor conversions of historic single-family homes that just have not been maintained, kept, and have caused issues in neighborhoods in terms of safety, but also, are not providing kind of the quality and level that you expect of living conditions that people deserve. And so, so trying to overcome some of those issues. And then finally, zoning. It is on the books. The city is planning on updating their zoning code, but there's just some challenges with the current regulations in terms of what is allowed and actually what exists and what the city needs in terms of its housing stock. And then opportunities, because of the these old homes and the old buildings, you just have actually a great cultural and economic value here in your housing stock that I think really needs to be leveraged. And then the market demands. So obviously I talked about the demand, and that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, and it's real. That market demand is real, and we saw that from the banks opening up over there at the landing, and how quickly it leased up. So there is that demand both at the higher end, but also all of these single-family homes that are being converted to 4 and 5 unit, very small unit buildings. Those, a number of them are not really at the quality and level that we'd expect for living conditions. They're still being leased up really, really rapidly. And so there is a need on both ends in terms of an income level of housing type. But so there's a real opportunity there. Then something I have to mention is there's actually some good examples of these housing stock that what we call is missing middle, because they're middle scale or house scale housing units that fit seamlessly in a single-family neighborhood. They look like big homes. We have a lot of examples of them over here, big and small homes, but they actually can fit multiple units in the home and still fit in well with the character. And so you have some good examples of those. And then finally, I think one of the greatest opportunities you all have is just through the folks that we've met this week, is just a lot of local knowledge and passion. So this was yesterday. I was walking down just a couple blocks from here, and there was a guy sitting on his porch who took this photo, and he stopped me because I was taking the photo of his house, and he started saying, he's like, yeah, I've owned this house for a while now, and I've just wanted to fix it up. It's an historic home, and I've called, I think, 9 contractors over 6 months. and haven't gotten anyone to come out and give me a quote. When they do, I don't hear from them. And finally, I found this one from, I think he said Hammond, had to come in from out of town to fix up, but he stayed with it because he was passionate about trying to preserve the cultural value of these buildings in this place. And then obviously, I have a picture of Drum's building up here. I love this example because he bought a house in this neighborhood, I think 30 years ago or so, and has been here, and then recently purchased this little bungalow cottage, and now offices out of it, and has a little unit in the back that he rents out and fixed it up, and just these kinds of passion, this kind of passion and local knowledge of these projects, I think is really something you can leverage. So with all those challenges and opportunities, then we dive down and try to look at where can we apply specifically and look at where we can leverage and provide some housing. So I'll just kind of identify some of the areas. Obviously, the downtown and some infill possibilities. When we first looked at this map, as Marianne mentioned, you have so much of your current housing stock still exists, it's still standing, and where are we going to put some of this stuff? And we ended up identifying a number of opportunities of infill located within the downtown, and a couple of key sites which we're going to talk about in just a second. But when we then overlaid it with the vacant parking lots, which is the pink, suddenly, which are all underutilized, and our parking team is going to talk to you more about that. Suddenly, the opportunities for housing in your downtown were quite incredible, and so we'll get to more of that when the parking team discusses. So within the downtown, we also looked at another opportunity is your Main Street. Have mixed-use buildings. A decent number of them are occupied on the ground floor, but very few are occupied on the upper levels. And so that's definitely an opportunity for more housing on the upper levels. And we'll talk about some programs and incentives to help people get those spaces ready for housing units on the upper level by still keeping the historic quality of the building. And then north, we identified 2 areas, and if we had another week, we would study them. But we just wanted to at least get them on the map. But obviously over there at Newport Landing and the Foundry site, 2 big areas that are within close proximity of your downtown. And then the first were neighborhood and the Tipton Street redevelopment that's currently planned with the elevated overpass above the railway right there. And obviously it's proximity, both sites proximity to the lake, which is just a fantastic amenity. So to kind of illustrate the housing opportunities, we wanted to focus on 2 near-term ready sites that, based on conversations the cities had and the availability of the land, you could potentially turn and start working on them today. And the first one is the La Porte Community School Corporation site down here. It's now the La Porte School System Administration building they're currently using, and there's a daycare there. But there is an existing track that is located to the northeast, and then a little playground for the daycare. The track is fenced off. No one's able to use it during the day, and the full-scale football field isn't being used either. The daycare does use the playground. And I'll just you can zoom in to see the site a little bit more closer. Harrison Street and Madison Street. The current platting shows 9 lots. And under your current zoning, that means you can get 9 single-family homes, 1 on each lot. So that's 9 units. When we looked at some of the fabric and the lot sizes and the house types in and around that neighborhood and said, what if we actually designed and built something that was in kind to the historic way that the neighborhood had built over the years? What we ended up finding through the use of a variety of those missing middle housing types, which are anything, you can see some of the examples here, and they all fit seamlessly within a neighborhood. You can get anything from a small cottage to a more traditional 2-story house to a stacked duplex to a little cottage court. This is actually a 4-plex. And also thinking about ancillary buildings, or what we call carriage houses, or ADUs in the back, where you could have parking below and you could have a little rental unit up above. And if we applied that over the site, we actually yielded, instead of 9 single-family homes, 36 units. 36 units and it could be a variety of home ownership and rental. Like I said, someone could own a home and have an ADU in the back and be renting out a little unit. And so a variety of sizes, and depending on the partners and who's involved in developing this, there could be all sorts of income levels, to affordable, to mid-level or mid-income, to upper level. So you can, within those 9 sites, you can kind of do it all, really, as a test case. So that was great, and when we found that out, we were like, this is fantastic. But then we wanted to kind of do a stress test of the code and say, okay, vision-wise, it seems like a really great idea, growing as the neighborhood has historically and providing all these units. But what is allowed by right if a developer or a handful of developers came in here and wanted to do this? And what we found is there's this pretty significant challenge. And like I said, if people were here before, and Marianne mentioned, I deal with code. I like code, but I know it could be very dry. So I get very excited about code, but I know some people don't. But I tried to simplify and just kind of pull out some key things. So I looked at this zone, which is, it is R1C, and what is allowed? The only thing that's allowed right now is single-family homes. So you can't have a duplex. You can't have an ADU with a unit in the back. So those wouldn't be allowed by right. So this is essentially legal to build today. So we began to, as we ran the stress test, we were just beginning to identify things for the city to look at, to change as they go and look at doing this zoning code update in the near term. So things like overall minimum lot size and minimum lot widths. The minimum lot width in this area is 60 feet wide. There are houses across the street here and here that are narrow width lots. Typical just kind of in-town neighborhood house is about, or lot is about 40 feet wide. So you can imagine you could do 3 40-foot wide lots in the same space that you did 260. So it's kind of calibrating the code to allow you to develop as almost just calibrating the code for the existing neighborhood, which needs to happen. And then obviously ADUs are not allowed, so thinking about allowing that to occur, and then just parking requirements. So just some of the things that would be challenging if anybody tried to do this today. So we wanted to kind of illustrate that. And the other thing, and this will apply to the other set that I talked to, we want to begin to illustrate just some of the designs to get a kind of real feel and texture of what maybe some of these would look like, from the cottage to a narrow house to a more wider standard house to what an ADU or a carriage house would look like. And then some of the multifamily but house scale unit types, like a front-to-back duplex, a stacked duplex, a side-to-side duplex, and a fourplex. And you can imagine all of these existing along a street and feeling very much in kind with the neighborhood adjacent to it. So that was that site. And then the other site we looked at was up here in Scott Park. I should mention, because the other study we did is we did look at your green space and your open space. And there's an existing playground here on the site, and then we relocated that on the northwest side of the school. They have a very deep front lawn. It actually has an incredible amount of shade trees, which would be perfect for a playground that they could plug in right there, plus additional space they would still have. And then I'll go ahead and move forward to the Scott Park site. And looking at that, this is a pretty unique site. The city currently owns it, and it's operated by the Parks Department. It has, sometimes I feel like I'm talking to people who already know this, but I'll describe it in case anybody's not familiar with the site. But it has an active play area here on the west side that has play equipment, and then it's a large grassy field kind of on the inner block with a baseball diamond on one end. From talking with the Parks Department and some local folks here, this area was identified as being very underutilized, and the Parks Department of the city is interested in potentially providing housing in that space. Because not only is it underutilized, but because all of these units, or all these houses back onto it, it's actually quite unsafe. And if it's not being used much, it's a financial burden to continue to mow and maintain it, and if people aren't using it, that money could be spent better elsewhere. And so, we began to, we did an initial scheme early on in the week where we looked at a sort of a cottage court neighborhood that has a green space in here and a little pocket playground here. So we tried to maintain some active recreational space to kind of keep the same acreage or keep the same area of at least the primarily utilized space here in Scott Park. And then looked at infilling houses Mainly, again, using the toolkit and a variety of housing types that I mentioned before. And with that, we got 35 units in this cottage court configuration, plus 2 pocket parks. And talking with the Parks Department and some other feedback we took throughout the week, we decided, they asked for to try to maintain a little bit greater park space. So we were able to kind of stretch this a little bit and provide a bigger pocket park on here. And it's just interesting because we used a few different mixes of building types from our palette. And though we were giving you more green space in this one that we did here, we went from 35 units to 38 units. So it's just really interesting how you can use those unit types and different mixes to really create the demand and to meet the demand of housing that you want. And then I should mention that we did another code stress test of this one. The only thing I'd mention about this, the other things apply. The challenge with this one is when we looked at the code, you do not have something called a planned unit development process that's available, and that allows unique designs such like this that you wouldn't be able to code. This is a center block area. You don't have a process in place to allow those to occur. Someone came with a vision that was quite unique for a very unique site. And so looking at being able to do a planned unit development would be something that we would recommend. And I should also mention with regard to the green space, because we were looking at potentially using, even though it was underutilized, green space. I know the Healthcare Foundation is one of the most important things they're doing right now is healthy living and outdoor activity. They're going through and they're trying to make local school playgrounds, as they replace their equipment and upgrade their equipment, have them be accessible to the neighborhoods and to the local public outside of school hours. So I know that's very important. We talked to the Parks Department. We made sure that there was green space within this site. And these are all, and their ideal is that you should be at least a minimum of 10, or a maximum of 10-minute walk from any green space, no matter where you are. And so when we mapped it out, there was a number of green spaces active throughout this area that actually gave them multiple options if you lived in this area. So with that data in hand, we felt that it made sense to look at a more kind of a more efficient use and a potential for housing in that area. So a lot of information. What I kind of want to do next is actually, we illustrated some opportunities, we addressed some challenges, and we talked about some other ones. And what I want to talk about now is kind of what we brought us here initially is what next. What do we do with these ideas, and what's the kind of plan of attack? And first thing I'd say is these 2 sites are really great sites to do as test cases, where you can begin to start testing and utilizing these tools. For example, this one right here, the school site, it's not complex in terms of its design, integrating an alley and laying out some lots. So it's not an incredible, difficult design exercise, but it'll allow you to test your code and maybe utilize it as a test case to update a certain area of the code. It'll allow you also to partner with local folks to begin to say, now that we've established this vision, who would be interested in coming to the table and participating in it? And then also just test the actual market for some of these buildings. So it's a really good test case. But overall, I say, in terms of where you are now and what you need to do, the city has talked about updating their comprehensive plan in this next year. And we talked this week with folks, and it's a really good time, especially given what we're here doing this week. And to just kind of walk you through what those steps are. So the comprehensive plan allows the community to come and establish their vision, right, and articulate it. And it allows community individuals to have some involvement and engagement and to begin to identify partnerships that exist. But a comprehensive plan is only as good as the actions that come out of it, right? You've established your goals. And so creating a specific action plan that's calibrated to the local community and the neighborhoods that exist here and their needs, as well as defining metrics. So I'm from Tulsa. And we're we like to call ourselves a data-driven city. We talk a lot about KPIs and that sort of thing. And so whenever we do an initiative or start a new program, we always have a metric in which we're trying to gauge our progress. And even if we haven't met it, it's like we can be able to track. So it's really important that as these action plans are established, you have a way of identifying those metrics. How many housing units you want to have in the next year? You know, how many affordable housing units you want to have in the next year? How many lots do you want to infill? And that sort of thing. And then from there, developing the action plans, start to develop the tools and resources. And that's what I'll go through here, and there's a lot of information right here, and I'll try to do it quickly. But just the tools and resources you can use to help achieve this housing. And then kind of repeat. And after 5-10 years, you keep addressing and identifying what you've done so far. So a couple of things I just want to mention really quickly, and I'll go through this quickly, but happy to talk with anybody afterwards about it. But obviously, one of the key tools that we talked about was updating the current code. And something I just want to mention, I mentioned some of the metrics, but in terms of the format of the code and the way you maybe want to update it, there's a conventional code, which is what you all have currently, and there's something called a form-based code. And this is the one from South Bend that we helped to develop with the city. And a form-based code is one that's based on the form that the community wants to see, the place they want to create. You design it first, and you create that look, that feel, and what you want to do, and then you code it, as opposed to a conventional code that uses metrics like FAR or units per acre that maybe have indirect relationships to what the form or the actual place feels like. So my recommendation is, given the historic and quality of the neighborhoods and the characters, that you would want to look more towards a form-based code to make sure that the community can be ensured that the kind of place they want to create that your code is calibrated for. Another tool that we developed, and Marianne mentioned, was pre-approved building program. And I think this is important, especially because you have a lot of historic homes, but these are essentially plans and buildings that we designed for the city of South Bend that are ready to go and that are available to the community to develop in South Bend. So, and what it does is it ensures the look, character, and quality of the product types that are getting built. And so that's something that might be of interest. There was some, the idea of housing types and these different variety of housing that you need, and then obviously some that aren't being maintained and that are being converted poorly. And so there are a series of programs and tools that you can use, from an affordable housing trust fund to something in Tulsa we have is a Gold Star Landlord program that basically provides incentives and grant opportunities for landlords when they join the program. And then a home repair grant program, which I know you guys have, but there are tools to make it more effective. And then a historic preservation tax credit program, which you're going to hear about next. And then finally, the vacancy above the retail. How do you activate and start to get units up there? The two tools that we've talked throughout the week about is an upper floor redevelopment grant program. Valparaiso, Michigan City use this. It's a grant program to incentivize and support people who want to convert these spaces into upper floor units. And then there's also actually, and you're going to hear about this, an incredible historic tax credit program that locking that and leveraging that could get those spaces activated. And then finally, just another big leverage is just local expertise, experience, and passion, which I mentioned before. Just leveraging those people that want to be part of this process and that have things to offer. That's probably one of your most powerful tools here. So I'm going to pass the torch on to the next. That was a lot of information. Thanks for staying with me. I look forward to talking to you more afterwards.
So thank you, Jen. This is incredible. So one of the things we were invited here to talk about housing, but you can't talk about housing in isolation. So we wanted to start with housing and then talk about all of the other elements that kick into that. Critical is preservation. So you have an amazing city. You didn't tear it down, but that doesn't mean you can't lose it. It doesn't mean it might not be torn down. So we've invited Steve Hartley. Steve Hartley is new to the faculty on the School of Architecture at the School of Architecture at the University of Notre Dame, part of our DUDA Center for Preservation, Sustainability, and Resiliency. We're going out similar to the housing and community regeneration. The DUDA Center is equally going out and working with communities and attempting to create these solutions. So Steve is with us and is going to talk about common sense preservation.
Well, thank you, Marianne. So About 2 months ago, Marianne sent me an email and said, hey, when you have a second, I want to talk to you about preservation in La Porte, Indiana. And when Marianne says I'm a new faculty member, spring semester was my first semester. I moved my family to South Bend in January. I still have a family, shockingly. So I said, I really want to, I want to talk about it. And she said, well, we're doing the Charrette in La Porte, and the problem, they have this amazing historic fabric, but there is, let's say, apprehension about historic preservation. And what we've been tasked to do is create common sense solutions to preservation, or as we're calling, common sense preservation. A very important thing about preservation for everyone to understand is that preservation is not about the past. Preservation is about your future, okay? It's about the future of your city. It's about the future of the environment in a sustainable factor. And it's about jobs. Preservation is economics. There are multiple studies out there, I'm not going to bore you reading this whole thing, about stabilizing property values, about dropping foreclosure rates in historic buildings, reducing crime, eliminating costs that are involved with empty locations, and finally, jobs. And I'm just going to read just one or two. Columbus, Ohio, rehabilitation projects based on tax credits, 354 direct jobs, average income of $69,000. 315 indirect jobs, wages of $50,000. These are real numbers. 165,000 direct jobs from preservation around the country in the last 3 years. And that's only on tax credit jobs, which are easily tracked. Most jobs are not tax credit jobs. So the real numbers, we're not really sure. Now, those of you that have been in the listening sessions the last few weeks, or last few days, I feel like every time I come up, I should be playing the Darth Vader theme as I come up, because I've been giving bad news. Bad news is always hopefully coupled with good news. So you have 2 National Register Historic Districts. You have the La Porte County Courthouse Square National Register District, which is Lincoln Way and around your courthouse. And then you have Indiana-Michigan Corridor. Okay? Those are National Register Districts. However, you only have 35 sites, which include 2 small locally protected districts. So overall, the only buildings that are protected from any change or alteration in your city are these 35 buildings.
And go further, demolition.
Demolition, thank you. National Register districts do not protect your city. National Register districts open up resources for your city. This map here, in all the grays, these are all the what we call contributing buildings for those National Register districts. None of these are protected. I could buy every building, including, by the way, every single building on Lincoln Way.
And the building we're in right now.
Yes. I could buy every building on Lincoln Way and the next day run a bulldozer through all of them. And there's nothing that could stop that. And luckily I'm driving home by myself and not in the car today, so I'm going to say this because I'm going to be surrounded by architects. Buildings are inanimate objects. They're sticks and bricks. What makes a building historic is not its age. Yes, that is one of the things that we use to measure history, or historic buildings. What makes them historic and what makes them valuable is the memories of the people that occupy and use those buildings. I'm not from La Porte, obviously, otherwise you might know me. I'm I come in and I look at these buildings and I say, yeah, they're beautiful buildings. But that's someone's grandmother's house. That's the house that I used to own. This was my best friend's house. This is where we used to play baseball. Those memories, the tangible evidence of those memories can be lost in a heartbeat in this town. Now, the good news. You have also, someone at one point, has surveyed 2 additional historic districts, Walker and West End. If we look back at our contributing maps, Walker and West End are almost entirely full. You lost a few of your contributing buildings downtown, mainly to parking lots, which we'll talk about parking lots again, not me. But these are almost full. You can easily make these 2 districts here, your National Register districts, local districts. Once they're local districts, you can apply protections to them. You can also list Walker and West End as local districts. Coincidentally, when we look at the housing study that was done a few years, or last year I believe it was, the derelict property areas, West End and Walker. But that's not enough. We have this huge strip of land here that has not been surveyed and has no protections. What we're proposing is to fill the gap. All of this is historically the Walker property. Create and expand the Walker Historic District. Once you do that, apply the same protections across all of your areas south of Lincoln Way. Once you do that, the original plot of the City of La Porte, plus a little bit of addition, is now protected. Your historic core will have your protections. So, once you do that, what's the next steps? I know that a lot of people are apprehensive about historic review.
And I think it's important to say, we know that you had preservation here before, and you've lost it. And so it's important to understand that we recognize the arc that you've been in.
That arc is done by a lot of cities. Preservation should not be the paint police. Okay? Preservation cannot be draconian. Once it becomes draconian, it turns everybody off. This is what I do for a living, and I don't want to stand in front of a draconian preservation board. We need common sense solutions for your neighborhood. So that's what we were tasked to do. Now the funny thing is when I got here and we started looking, you already have them. They already exist. Your preservation ordinance, which was developed in conjunction with Indiana Landmarks, which I'm going to stop for a second. I've worked all over the country in a lot of different states. There is no better statewide historic preservation organization in the United States than Indiana Landmarks. Indiana Landmarks, sorry, Deb. Indiana Landmarks is like the postgraduate school for preservationists. That's where they go to learn how to run state organizations correctly. And you have that as your resource here. The standards that were developed in conjunction with Indiana Landmarks are amazing. They are comprehensive, but they're not restrictive. And I'll give you a perfect example. In your code, you can actually put cement siding, what we commonly call in the industry hardy board, on the side of your building. That is unheard of in most of the country, and that's a huge fight in most of the country. We don't need to create standards for you. You already have them. Take them off the shelf and implement them. Now, when you get the document, you look at the document, it's 144 pages long, okay? it's a lot of pictures. All right, it's not 144 pages of text. Can it be tweaked? Sure. It's a living document. It's always working. But it's a great start, a better start than most neighborhoods have. So what do you do when you implement those rules? Okay, you have a problem in some of these areas with absentee landlords basically running down the neighborhood. First thing you do is apply your standards to those areas. Any changes they have to make have to go through the design review process. I will have to say, absentee landlords and unscrupulous, let's call them, landlords run from preservation standards because they don't want to deal with them. The other thing is you should do is stimulate your code enforcement. Now, when we printed this, I got a last-minute request to change the poster. So, Mr. Mayor, there you go. So, the problem you saw, lack of some code enforcement. Okay? You need to strengthen your code enforcement. Your solution, simplify how they work together. Okay? First thing you do, if you have a derelict property owner, you send code enforcement. Hey, you need to fix these front steps. Oh, by the way, you can't go to Home Depot and buy a $10 bag of cement and fix those broken front steps. You need to take that repair to the board. And the board's going to say, sorry, that's not historic. It's going to cost you a whole lot more. All of a sudden, that $50 repair for that absentee landlord becomes $400, $500. When you're renting these places for $400 a month, there's a whole month's rent that's gone. Do that a couple times, and the for sale sign goes on the door.
I think it's important to mention, though, as we're talking about this, that there's multiple issues we're solving for, and we want to make sure that you don't have out-of-town derelict landlords creating problems in your community. We also don't want to price people out that live here. No. So there's a balancing act to what's being presented here to make sure that we're solving for multiple problems at once and making sure that the tools deployed are doing that in a way that don't displace. One of the things that we were hired for actually was to bring in community regeneration without displacement. I want to really highlight that point because what Steve's saying is really important, and we're solving for multiple issues here. And one of them is to engage the economy, making it harder for people to treat your community like garbage, because that's what is happening in a lot of these things. But doing that cannot be at the expense of the people that live here and genuinely want to contribute to this community, and we recognize that is a conflict. And that is one of the things that we have to address through policy, through benefactors and nonprofits, and through the systems that are put in place, because the market alone cannot protect what we need to protect in doing so. And I'm jumping in to highlight this because every one of these presentations, and I'm going to start going more, and we also do need to go faster. Yes. So as a note to everyone all of the speakers, we need to keep moving as I'm adding extra words. Not lost on me. Having said that, each of these issues knit together and layer over each other. So housing, when Jen presents housing in a house type that shows multiple units, the thought bubble I know for a lot of people in this room is, we don't want that. And this is actually, the mayor and I have had a lot of conversations from the very first start about, we cannot have, we can't have multifamily because that's what's overcrowding and that becomes derelict. It's not the building type, it's the governance. So now Steve is coming in and saying, no, this is how we create the governance. But then we can't do that to a point that you can't afford to live here. We understand the conflict and the nuance, and we're actually actively working to solve for that. And I want to make sure that, as just sort of finishing up, that we sort of hit the tools that help to do that. all of these, there's a lot of words on these, there's a lot of words on all of these. We're going to spread these out, and if we can actually move faster in speaking, then you can come up and read. So I'm going to let you make your final point here, and then we'll move on to the next group.
Okay. So we can, anyone that has more questions about that concern that Marianne brought up, please come and see me afterwards. Synergizing your leverage and your code, your preservation code says that all these different building permits, code enforcement, all should be working together to enforce the preservation code. So what happens after that? The next thing we have to do is educate the community, okay? The first thing is we need to have some workshops on how preservation works. Most notably, what is preservation and what is it not? What can you do and what can't you do? We're not going to come into your house, I promise. All right. How do tax credits work? And I'll talk about tax credits in a second. Indiana Landmarks already has an amazing tax credit program, a tax credit workshop that they can just drop right in and teach you. Understanding the review process. Commission shows you how to do that. Realtor workshops, how to sell an historic property. What resources are available? Opening up state of Indiana residential historic tax credits. 20% tax credit for 10 years on your adjusted gross income, provided you spend $10,000 on a certified rehabilitation expenses of an historic home. Federal for your commercial properties. Again, same thing, 20%. Tax credits in this area alone, $18 million, have just been done in District 2. And then low-income housing is $9 billion for low-income housing development. And finally, because I can see Marianne's creeping closer towards me, finally, opening the Homeowners Academy. Weekend workshops to teach homeowners how to do basic repairs on their homes. Plumbing, masonry, window reglazing. And my one that I get all the time as soon as I walk into a home, where is that water coming from? That's the most common question I have. Okay, because I am speeded off the floor, I'm going to turn it back over to Mary. Yep.
One of the critical issues that came up immediately as we were talking and learning about this city is the awareness, as you all know, that there's a lot of trucks in your downtown. And that is stifling the economic development of your community, and it's impacting housing, it's impacting all elements. So this was an immediate issue that we needed to solve for and look at how we can address the traffic downtown, and if we can adjust the traffic, making your street safer, we can create walkable communities that can attract people. One of the things we've heard is we don't want to bring our families downtown because you're going to open a door and maybe there's a truck going by. It could hurt your child could get hurt. Nobody wants that. We need safe communities. We need safe housing. We need safe streets. These work together. We always color outside the lines. So the idea that housing and streets and downtown all have to work together is central and core to our work. So our team here, we're very fortunate to have, we have an international team with us. Norman Garrick has actually flown in from Zurich to help us. He's retired from the University of Connecticut, a transportation expert. And we have Phil Barutha, who is with the College of Engineering, I keep calling it school, the College of Engineering at the University of Notre Dame. And they're going to talk to us about the transportation and parking.
Okay, good evening, everyone. And it's really lovely to see you all here. It's been a wonderful week. I wanted to start out we've been talking about some of the decisions that were made that affected how cities in America and all over the world were affected starting in the 50s and 60s, and it sucked the lives out of cities. And one of the important issue, or probably the most important issue, was a change in how we thought about how we would get around. We all thought we would get a car and I would drive everywhere. Kids used to walk to school. Now almost nobody, maybe except a few here, Almost nobody anywhere walked to school anymore. Okay, so transportation affected the health of cities. In fact, it killed cities. If you look at Detroit, it killed Detroit, which is ironic. But it's not just the health of cities that was destroyed in this transition. It's also the health of us, of the individuals living in these places. I don't know if any of you have been paying attention to the stories coming out of Harvard about the historic decrease in life expectancy in America. It's now as low as it was 20 years ago. Now think about that. This is one of the richest countries in the world, and people now are living shorter lifespan than they did 20 years ago. And you think this is because of COVID, etc. This is not happening anywhere else in rich countries. It's here in America that this is happening. We did a study years ago at the University of Connecticut looking at California cities, and what we showed was that the way that cities were built, if they were built for car access, that diabetics, obesity, heart disease were always higher in those cities. So a big part of this life expectancy thing is due to the fact that we have made this switch. Oh, the big one I didn't mention, and what has happened over the last 10 years, is this ridiculous increase, this crazy, scary increase in people being killed by cars. Okay. So what we're talking about here is a transitioning back to a different way of thinking about getting around. And I'm really emphasizing this point because one of the biggest obstacles to change is, how am I going to get around with my car? Where am I going to park? That's always the biggest obstacle to change in places. And if we don't get away from that mindset, it's going to be really difficult to make the changes that are needed. So what we have been looking at is one plan that deals with some of the volume and the type of vehicle that are on Lincoln Way, and Phil will discuss that in a bit. But the other thing that I spent some time looking at is to try to put some numbers to the understanding that when you change the environment, people don't behave in the same way when it comes to transportation. If you build an urban community, people don't drive everywhere. They don't expect to park in front of the grocery store. And so you see less cars, you see less need for parking, and that sounds like theory, but the numbers show it. And I wanted to illustrate it with some of the numbers that I got from the parking study that was conducted on April 13 this year in La Porte. And what they found was that, well, it shows here the three categories of parking you have in your downtown, on-street, public off-street, and private off-street. And one of the things that stands out is public off-street, meaning that most of the parking in downtown is not controlled, is not under the control of the city. But the second thing is that at the busiest time of the day, 66% of that parking was empty. So you have built all of that parking and it's sitting there empty most of the time. You think about the economic implication of that, it's really scary. We have looked at that in Hartford, where we saw that the income that they're foregoing to taxes is about $20 million by taking out so much of the city for parking. The second point is that to try to illustrate the point that if you make a different environment, people change. 15 years ago, we did a study of 6 cities in New England. 3 of them were very traditional places, somewhat like what you're trying to achieve. I won't name the cities, and they were not perfect places. They were places that were still fairly auto-dependent, but the amount of parking that was used in those cities was about half of what was used in suburban places. And the irony of that is that those places, the historical places had way more people in their downtown. Way less cars, way more people. Cars don't spend money. Cars don't spend money. They're getting people to come and spend in their downtown by creating the atmosphere where you don't need to get into your car to cross the road, where you don't need to even bring a car to downtown. So by creating that atmosphere in New England, people behave differently. So we found that you needed 1 parking space for 1,000 square foot of business, of residents or businesses, etc. Another irony of that number is that many of the towns were requiring developers to build 5 times that amount of parking. Even those traditional towns were saying to the developers, we want this minimum amount of parking, which is just insane. In terms of La Porte, your numbers were closer to those traditional towns. So you're already behaving somewhat like those towns. So looking at, if you were to, one of the things that is interesting, and I took into account in these calculations, was the fact that there was a lot of places that were not occupied in the downtown, especially on the upper floors. But the second thing is that even those places that were occupied are not seeing the kind of business like you would see in the cities we studied. But in any case, thinking about where these numbers take us, if we were operating more like these traditional towns, what I found was that if we filled up all of the businesses, all of the buildings in downtown La Porte, we could still operate without any additional parking. So you would get to about 80% use of the parking that exists now, which is more like what you would like, so that you're not wasting all of the money on that land sitting there. Okay, so in other words, in the near future, as this town develops, and we are sure that it's going to develop, you probably don't need any more parking. There is just so much parking around. But we are also thinking about the long-term future, where some of those lots are going to be filled in. And in that case, we think that you might need up to 500 spaces in a garage. But that is in 20 years' time, is what we're projecting. But the point is that garages are very expensive. People forget that parking is not free. Each space in a garage costs $40,000 to build, and $3,000, this was from the report of the parking consultant, $3,000 to maintain each year. It's a lot of money that people expect to be given the space free. So what that leads me to conclude is that, or to suggest, is that you need to be, while you're developing, you need to be developing strategies to encourage people to be walking and biking to your downtown, And you can look at what was done in the cities that I studied. And what they did was they created park once environments, places where you went there. If you went there with your car, you'd get out and walk to all your destinations. That doesn't happen in places that don't have the environment that is conducive to that. The second thing is that in those cities, they actually managed their parking. In a lot of American places, years ago I wrote an article and I said, we say that we value parking, but we treat it like garbage. A lot of cities didn't even know 10 years ago how much parking spaces they had. So they couldn't manage it. Okay. So be able to say who use what, where, when, etc. How do you deal with the fact that so much of the property is owned is in private hands? And then the third thing is to facilitate people getting to your downtown by walking or biking. And so that led me to one last point that I want to make before I turn over to Phil, is the idea that La Porte, Indiana, has such potential for biking. Biking is not a very popular subject in Indiana. I know Indianapolis is moving in the right direction. Carmel, somewhat. But I think La Porte could be a leader. There is just so much that is going for you. One of the things, of course, is the fact, I remember when I was at Purdue, they used to refer to it as lay flat Indiana. And La Porte is not much different from that. But you also have the street network that is very, very conducive to developing a parking network. So I'm really glad to see the city has started looking at how they can use that resources to start changing the culture for getting around in the city.
Awesome. So thank you. Thank you, Norman.
So,
A key piece of this and a really important part to highlight of Norman's presentation is to achieve everything he just said, we have to make downtown pedestrian friendly, and that's where Phil's work comes in.
Thank you, Marianne. We view transportation as a system, and one that ideally works synergistically with your overall city and community ecosystem that works together with that. Marianne asked earlier how many people here are from La Porte and saw quite a few hands go up. Can I ask how many people here are proud alumni of the La Porte Slicers? Okay, so I just learned today, one of my goals this week was to learn what is a slicer. And I did learn that today. I found out that it was a manufacturing business here that produced meat slicers.
Yes.
And I think that's really representative of the city. I think that really represents that there's a proud history of industrial and manufacturing excellence in this city amongst the very agricultural community. Now what I'm here to talk about is not manufacturing, but we do want to look at transportation. And what we were really looking at closely and acutely was the state highway system that slices through the downtown center. Thank you, Dave. Keep the puns coming. I'll try not to speed through this anyway. But thank you. Anyway, so what we identified was those various different state highway routes that are coming right through the heart of your great city here in La Porte. And like Marianne said, what we were really tasked with, the goal is we want to increase access and mobility to the community, and specifically the pedestrians and some of the local traffic within that heart of that city, that downtown area, that historic Lincoln Highway that slices right through the center of your city. And so what we were looking at is ways that we can create that place in your downtown, but understanding that traffic still needs to flow through. I have a healthy flow through within the city, in or around it. And so really what we were looking at is how can we redistribute and reprioritize some of the traffic that's running through, right now currently running through your city, to create that welcoming safe environment for that community that's operating and wanting to access that downtown area and bring even more life to the downtown. And so what we did was we did an analysis, we did a stress test of the current traffic that is running through your city, and specifically on those state highways. So we looked at the total traffic counts that are coming in on each of those main state highways, 35, 39, Highway 2, of course, which is Lincoln Highway, and at the various different access points to the south, to of course, the west, north, east, and south, including Highway 4 as well. And our legend here identifies some of the higher density traffic volumes are represented by the orange. What we would call medium to high traffic volumes are represented by the yellow. Our medium manageable traffic loads are in purple, and green are our lower, more residential type of loading we would see for traffic counts running through those areas. And you can see our highway, our Lincoln Highway here right through the downtown. This would be Indiana and Lincoln Way that runs right through the heart of your city. You can see that has quite a bit of active traffic there. And in much of that traffic, as we witnessed throughout the course of this week, is truck traffic. So heavier traffic running through there, not just lighter vehicles, but a significant amount of heavy traffic. And so really what we were looking at is, how can we somehow alleviate some of that stress of that traffic running right through Lincoln Way and create that place and that environment that really draws people in. And whether they're shopping there, working there, maybe they're bringing their children to play in that area as well, as there's a couple of nice parks and some nice spaces through there. So as we were going through this exercise, we look at different ways to do it. I think everyone's heard of the north-south corridor. Of course, that's really expanding out or pushing, I guess, some of the traffic out, and that looks like a really great engineered solution. However, we wanted to look at some alternate solutions as well and some options to put on the table in addition to that to help alleviate that stress. And what we felt was a strength of the city was the infrastructure in this city. And so what we really were trying to do with these options and solutions was to try to leverage the existing infrastructure that was already there to the best of the ability. Minimize the impact, obviously hopefully minimize the cost as well to the community. So that the exercise that we went through was how can we best leverage that existing infrastructure? And as we looked at this, we identified one potential solution here, which is to redistribute some of that traffic. And really we're focusing on probably a little bit more of that passing through traffic, so some of that truck traffic, and diverting that away from Lincoln Way. I think some of the local traffic that's there to use the businesses still will be operating on Lincoln Way, but redistribute some of that other traffic away. And one of the streets we identified was Washington Street, just that runs parallel with Lincoln Way, just to the north of that. Is a very good street. We evaluated that and looked at one of our options was diverting that traffic just to the north of Lincoln Way, some of that passing through traffic, and in partnership with the State Department of Transportation, we're looking at some options, and that was one potential concept that I think between the city, us, and the state looks as a potential option there, and diverting some of the traffic, obviously not all of it, but through that onto Washington Street. There would be some work there on Washington. That current condition is a good road. Obviously, it's not up to Department of Transportation standards, so there's some upgrade to that road to get that to Department of Transportation standards, as well as look at rerouting some of that traffic from 3539, which is Indiana Road, or temporarily on Lincoln Way to route it to the west and then come back to the east and flow out to tie into Highway 2 at Boston Street and Highway 2, and then ultimately out to the east on Highway 2. And then, of course, the reverse of that, if you're coming from the east, you'd be coming west and then ultimately north on 35 and 39. So we looked deeply at that option. And again, just some upgrades is what we've identified. That is a very wide area, at least Washington Street. Currently, the leading candidate we've looked at is connecting from Washington to Brighton. Brighton is a little more narrow, so a little bit of widening there and upgrades to that road as well. But all seems manageable from an engineering perspective. Seems like all of that work could be done. Now, so that was our main goal, is how do we create that space in the downtown area? But we didn't want to lose sight of, as we're looking at this north-south corridor, to also how do we facilitate, how do we create some transportation routes that could help facilitate future development as well. And again, we talked about La Porte has a proud history of industrial manufacturing excellence, and some of that industry has moved somewhat out of the center of the city and has moved to some of those outer bands. And so we're also looking at some options there to help with the traffic flow that might also facilitate a little smoother transportation there on some of the outsides. And so we looked at another option here as well that could be a bridge, so to speak, from that north-south corridor, and we're calling it an interim north-south corridor. We've identified Boyd Road running through here as a very, again, very good infrastructure that's currently in place, and how can we leverage that? And then we've identified, ultimately, I think we would like to get north, just what's shown here, and tie into our main highway arteries. However, we've identified some maybe interim solutions here, running on this existing road 200, I believe it's east, County Road 200 East here, and maybe developing some new improvement, some new infrastructure that connects Highway 2 to that, to route that traffic around. So we've looked at those couple options through there, and again, seemed from an engineering standpoint, seem manageable. And seem like some good potential options to be further evaluated and assessed, of course, in partnership with the state and city. And as Marianne mentioned, of course, we want to provide some vision and some options, and she's speeding me up. And so I did want to leave you with, but really we were looking at also implementation was something that we were looking at. So how do we take it from what's this brainstorming and coming up with ideas and options and just leave you with it, okay, we'll figure it out. We did take an assessment of these couple options. And has anybody here, as I was walking around too, I learned about slicers. I also learned about the local music store here, Roxy Music. Yeah, so I was looking for a drum kit earlier, but anyway, so I ventured in there, but anyway, I saw these on their sign. So really we're looking at just some costs, some rough order magnitude costs associated with each of these. And so this outer infrastructure here, we're looking at between 100 and 150 million roughly. And the upgrade here to run parallel route, we're looking at about 10 to 50 million. So about 10% of that overall cost is what we're looking at. And with this interim solution here, we're looking at about 25% of that overall cost, 25 to 35 million. So we do want to be also, again, come up with some solutions that may be viable, both from a technical perspective and in a financial feasibility, as I'm sure we need to be good stewards of financials here in the city as well.
Great. Thank you. There's one more. We're going to merge them together. Can we bring yeah. So can we bring that one up too? So the last two, we've got this large master plan here, which shows two colors. The orange are all of your existing buildings, and the darker red indicate development opportunities. We have, this is a plan, a vision that in some cases colors a little bit outside the lines. It's looking to 20, 30 years, the full build out, the full potential of La Porte. It makes the assumption that there are not trucks running up and down your main street, and that it's been returned to a pedestrian-friendly community. It shows, it's something that would be phased in over time, but it shows this long-term vision. Back to that idea at the very beginning as we talked about vision versus implementation. So Rodrigo Balat and Anthony Catania have joined us. They're going to very quickly, each talk about a couple bullet points. Rodrigo is joining us from Guatemala. Anthony joining us from Oklahoma. I've never been on a two Oklahoma Charrette before. They're both also graduates of the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture. And they're each going to give a couple bullet points. We're not going to talk about street sections, but maybe just talk about what it is very quickly, both of you, what happens when the trucks leave, and what are some, and Anthony's going to talk a little bit about the hospital site, some potential of some key things to look for. We're not going to go through all of the images, just talk very briefly.
Hitting the 2 times button here, so all right. So let's do this. So we identified 2 key issues in the downtown area. First of all, for me, it was scary crossing the street for the first time, trying to go see your beautiful fabric. And second of all, downtown just didn't have that much life. Some of the shops were empty. Some of the second, third floors were empty too. So how do we bring back life to downtown to make that an interesting experience to want to walk? So 2 things. The crossing the street thing we will address here. These are hard to see, but feel free to come on over afterwards. It's just essentially addressing what Lincoln Way looks without the trucks, and it's fantastic. Right now, less than 30% of the street is dedicated to pedestrians. We're aiming to go over 40, close to 50% just for pedestrians, and that's great. It's going to solve a lot of problems. On the interesting part of making downtown, we started looking at what are some of the missing holes that we need to fill with activity, with buildings, and so we find those in red. But we also noticed that there is a key center here that we think is the center of the downtown area, and this is what we've blown up here right on the intersection of Lincoln and Monroe. And so the idea is creating a new park between Lincoln and State Street and adding this market building, which our super talented renderer did here. So you can see that there's a park with like a pavilion for concert venues, and this could potentially hold something like the farmer's market to be all year round indoors. So I encourage everybody to come up here afterwards, and I'll turn the mic over to Anthony.
Thanks, Rodrigo. So I'm just going to say a few words about your hospital site, the old hospital site, and talk just very, very briefly for about 2 minutes about a design strategy for that site. So on this plan, it's essentially this area here is the old hospital. And so it's important, first off, for the town to have a vision to present to potential developers about what happens on that site. And one of the reasons why that's important is because developers operate in a default mode when it comes to infill urban development. And very often their strategy for a site like this might be to drop a very large parking garage in the center of this site and wrap it with a really, really large apartment building. And so we've taken the complete opposite approach here and broken down the apartment units into many smaller buildings. On the board, at the bottom of the board over there, there's some information about what those smaller buildings look like, 4 to 6 units per building instead of hundreds of units in a single building. And so what we're really trying to do is after communication throughout this week, talking with folks in town, trying to create a vision to show to developers and say, this is what we want for this site. We want you to do this. This is what we want. So thank you.
Thank you. One of the key pieces of the hospital site, and I've been shooing them off, so one key point I do want to point out that's really important of Anthony's design is scale. And that the scale of La Porte is very important. You have 2- and 3-story buildings. And it's also texture. It's the solid to void ratio. It's how a building feels. One of the things that you have so special is, as we talked about the preservation, is the character of the buildings. If you look at new construction in many places, and there's a New York Times article about the Anywhere USA sort of mega building that drops, those buildings literally are put a blindfold on, take it off, what city are you in? La Porte is special. So the site can be very special as well if it holds the scale and the texture of your existing buildings. And that's one of the things that Anthony has done in this design, and also holding the street to create that fabric. So we'd love to present more of this to anyone that wants to come up. We have, so in terms of the boards, we actually have now rotated through the boards. Stefanos Paulozoidis, our dean, is going to come share a few words.
I will. No, fine.
Actually, yes, you need a mic. We're recording.
I need a mic. Yeah. Do I hold it like this?
You can just,
Like this.
anywhere, just clip it
it.
on. Yeah. There you go.
I would like to thank you for being here tonight. I'd like to thank you for entrusting at least the thinking about the future of your city to us. I'd like to summarize very briefly of where we are. Maybe you can say a few words about what's next. Last semester, we had a couple of really brilliant German architects in our faculty that we invited to visit us from Berlin. One night in my house over dinner, the discussion came to places like La Porte and South Bend. And they started lamenting the fact that Americans are somehow, that the state of the chaos of our cities has something to do with our unruly character, that we don't believe in rules and we just let things go. And it came to a complete shock to them to know that the chaos out there that we enjoy every day in our lives is actually chaos by design. Actually, chaos by regulation, to be very precise. Every last thing that you heard about today that is wrong about the state of the city has to do with wrong rules in place. So the first item that we have to focus on is how to get to the right rules. That's the first one. Because, we are a society of extreme orderly approaches to administration, and we believe deeply in the rule of law in every way. We're not going to let things go. But how do we replace what we have with rules that give us the kind of city, the kind of place, the kind of economy, the kind of life that we want? That's an extraordinary question. So the first thing is to go through that process. The second process is to resist acting for action's sake. I've noticed in the 3 years I've been living in Indiana that municipalities are spending money right and left going after actions in landscape, in transportation, in zoning reform, in all kinds of places that are not coordinated. And they're not coordinated not because they don't work with each other, but they're not vision-based. What you heard today is that we need to have a vision, and that the vision is returning this city to the way it used to be. Not because we're romantics or nostalgics of some kind or another, but because this is the only way that we can return to prosperity. That the detour of the last 80 years was a remarkably wrong one for our entire country, and that suburbanizations has resulted, and the rule of the car have resulted in a radical drop in our standard of living, and a radical drop in the possibility of having a positive future. So we need to start thinking about that subject. Do we accept the vision? How do we work with this vision? How do we regulate this vision? And what expectations we have ourselves as we go forwards? Can we flexibly figure out over the last 5 or 10 years whether we're doing the right thing or not? Or do we have to wait another 80 years before we decide that this game is over? So that's where we find ourselves by and large. And then there's the question of how do we operate within this vision? And how we operate this vision has to do with priorities. And priorities have to do with catalytic actions. Why do we need catalytic actions? Because our cities in this part of the state are on ICU when it comes to economic development, particularly in their downtowns. So we have to do something about jump-starting them positively, right? So what are the issues? What are the catalytic issues here? I think there are 3. One is this question of regulation, which is actually a major political subject, because the mayor or the council or the commissions cannot change the rules. Only you all can change the rules, partially through ballot decisions. The second one is that we really need to think about how we can take 1,200, you heard me right, 1,200 trucks a day out of Lincoln Way. 1,200 trucks a day out of Lincoln Way. If that doesn't happen, we might as well hang them up, as far as I'm concerned. I don't see a future for the city and its downtown if that problem is not mitigated in a radical way. And the third issue is how to intervene downtown in a socially responsible, economically responsible, environmentally responsible, culturally responsible way, in all of those ways together, to make sure that the fabric of the city downtown, which is notable, is maintained and grown. And why is that important? Somehow we all gotten to be, social and cultural activists? No. The point is, how many of you have had something built in the last 3 years? Okay, the costs of building are absolutely extraordinary. In the last 3 years, there's been a rise in the cost of building by 40% in our country. 40. So hold on to your garages, people. There is no way we can rebuild the shacks out there. Forget the good buildings, the very good buildings, the extraordinary buildings, and the notable and the most extraordinary ones. We have to keep every last stick because we can't afford to build anything like it. I mean, I'm sorry, this is not a very optimistic message I have to give you. But I'm not responsible for the building cost of the country, right? So that then, the preservation, recycling, taking the landlords out, the making of the place safe and responsible and attractive, that is another major third issue that we need to do. And I'm going to leave you with this thought, and that is that the exhilarating aspect of this project for us and being here in this wonderful building with all of you is that you are here, because you are the people you've been waiting for. That's my message, my last message for the evening. You are the ones who are going to get this done, because we and actually the mayor buttonholed me in the parking area today and said, "When you leave, you're not leaving, are you?" And I said, "No, we're not leaving. Actually, we're setting up this center in such a way so we can follow up. We have an implementation side now to our center, and we're going to be with you. Don't call us at night after 6, but we'll be here for the duration. We believe in this as a movement. This is a movement to save our country, because I do believe that the future of our country is in the Midwest. That's one of the reasons I came to be a dean here, is because I think the economic conditions and the pressures that have distorted our coasts are going to bring people here over the next 100 years. It's going to be a 100-year process of coming back to this place. And I think the best way to receive that pressure is to have places worth living in, for the ones who are here and for the ones who are coming. So, Marianne,
Great.
what's next?
I will. Thank you, Stefanos. I want to say that all of the work shown here today was only possible because Father Nate and St. Peter's Church allowed us to invade and stay late into the evening and take over his building for the last week. So I wanted a special round of applause for Father Nate. Thank you. Stefanos said earlier, he said, "Can we take this room with us?" That turns out a half gymnasium in a Catholic school is the perfect charrette room. So thank you very much, Father Nate. Thank you to Maria, to Tricia and Michelle from the Healthcare Foundation for allowing us to be part of this journey. We are so excited by the work that's been here. Thank you to the mayor and your amazing staff, Craig and Nick, for being with us for the week. Where we go from here is we get some sleep. Actually, we're gonna have a nice meal and get some sleep. But we are gonna take all of this information and distill it into a report. It will be a living document, so you don't have to wait 6 months to get everything. We'll be feeding it along in the pieces that are needed for immediate actions. Policy and implementation is a critical part, so we're going to be working with other partners to help guide how to set up a housing nonprofit, how to do better code enforcement, how to figure out affordability, when all of this comes together and taxes go up, how do we protect people on fixed incomes. These are issues that we are trying to solve for. We don't have solutions for everything, but it's a path towards that. So we'll take several months and write that report and then continue on and hopefully have a long relationship to see this amazing city. So thank you all for coming out. I wanted one last thing. If all of the members of our design team, this did not happen on its own. If all of our amazing students would stand up, I want to recognize everyone. Remember, So we have architecture students and engineering students who are here. We have Ian Espinoza, our amazing renderer. Jason Arnold's been here from our Real Estate Institute. And we're just so fortunate to have this incredible team and these amazing people to be working with. So thank you all. The boards are up. Come visit, come chat with us, and thank you for coming.